Hello and welcome back to Conversations on Consent. We're Consent Talk. It's Samani and Paige. Alex isn't here today, but he'll be back on future episodes. But yeah, Paige, how you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I'm excited to chat.
I miss talking to you. I'm really glad that, we're gonna be putting out some more of these conversations pretty quickly.
I think that today we should talk about the idea of dirty talk and talking dirty. And why are we calling
Yeah.
it dirty?
People talk about talking dirty during sexual activities all the time, and that's inherently fine. I want to just bring up how a lot of times people say sex as a act is dirty. And I feel like you and I have so much to dissect on that because why? Like, why is sex dirty?
Well, right. And I think that, there's the physical dirtiness of sex. Like it's a messy thing. There's bodily fluids, there's cleanup involved, but we're more talking about, I think, the metaphorical side of it and the dirty as kind of the opposition to clean and as the opposition to pure.
Before we even get into purity, like you said, the definition of dirty is not what we're addressing right now. The physical definition, you look at a dictionary, something dirty is, unclean, messy, you have to clean up after it, all these things, right? That part is natural. That part is very much fine. It's people look at another person after having had sex or talking about sex and view them as this, like, dirty person.
I think too, it's something that has been really pervasive in pop culture on so many different levels. But I think about songs specifically by male artists that talk about
God, Jason Derulo, "Talk
Jason
dirty
Derulo.
to me."
Right. Like,
Talk
okay,
He
Jason Derulo,
literally is
great
like,
example.
oh
Like,
my gosh.
first of all, that song, the line, "Been around the world, don't speak the language, but your beauty don't need explaining."
Oh, it's just so
Can we talk
okay.
about the violations of consent with that one?
No, literally, like, what do you mean there's no verbal consent? Like, what do you mean there's no clear-cut consent? Just because 'cause you're looking at someone's body part does not mean that they want to have sex with you.
Right. And I think music is so reflective of where we are as a society.
Going back to talking about consent in songs, I mean, Blurred Lines, Robert
Oh
Thicke,
my god,
or
yeah.
however you say it, that song, I remember when I was in middle school listening to that song and being like, something feels off about this, and I, at that point, hadn't had consent
It's
education.
literally about wanting to be able to, hook up with people who are underage. It's literally the song. I
I
hate the blurred
know.
lines of, a 17-year-old. Like, no.
Yeah. Like, I know you want it. Ew. Speaking of middle school, like, when we talk about how we're even introduced to consent and talking about sex, like, any, like, impressionable kid that's listening to these kinds of songs is like, music is making women very, like, promiscuous. It's fitting us into these, like, sexual categories, and the same thing can go for men. Like, men are the ones with the power to recognize X, Y, and Z is a sign for consent, and it's like, that's just so,
Well,
you know
and
what
I
I
think
mean?
when we're saying dirty, I think that, I think of dirty we already said the opposition of it. I think of, the synonyms of this connotation of it as, slutty, hoary,
Mm,
hoey, gross. It's that you're somehow betraying, a level of goodness and, a
yeah,
level of moral cleanness.
and a lot of times, okay, I'm gonna make a shoe analogy here, like, you look at a pair of shoes and they're clean or dirty, right? Dirty shoes indicate that you've used them, right? And I hate how in this process of objectifying people, a lot of times I've heard people be like, "Oh, that person so ran through," or, like, all this kind of things, and it's like, dirty in its connotation is now also being connected to use. This person has been used or, like, their goods aren't as whatever, and it's just so
It's so
objectification,
gross.
ugh.
Well, and I think it leads into, a larger conversation about objectification and how, as a society, I think that especially women, not that it isn't applicable to men, because I think it is, but we look at someone who's had sex with a lot of people, who has a high body count, as less than, as ineligible. It's the idea that when you've been with multiple people, when you're someone who has enjoyed sex and has, like, openly enjoyed sex, that you are somehow less than someone who doesn't or who
Yeah.
pretends they don't.
Beyond that, I feel like there's also this stigma that exists not only with people who do enjoy talking about sex, whether they've, you know, participated in sex or not. Like the sex positive narrative is inherently viewed as like this thing we shouldn't talk about, this taboo subject. But I also think that folks who are not as who don't want to have sex as much, right? Or are a little more hesitant or nervous to go into sex, they also face a very similar taboo. If I do ask questions, then I'm going to be viewed as this like dirty person and I don't want to taint my reputation in doing that. And I think why is talking about sex or wanting to have sex and doing this very common, necessary thing,
Human
action,
function,
human
biological.
function. No, truly, like, this is how babies are made, and why is talking about that with this tone of, like, this person is dirty? That really perpetuates the stigma for sex positive, sex questioning, etcetera. Ugh.
Well, I remember when I was first learning about consent, they showed us a video called "Consent is Tea." I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was like it had a moment of, like, virality, like, of in education. And basically the whole idea was like, if someone's asleep, they don't want tea. If someone says, "No, I don't want tea," and then you ask them 3 more times, "Are you sure you don't want tea?" And they finally say, "Sure, I'll have some tea." They don't want tea. And tea was obviously the
Mm.
metaphor for sex. But I actually think it was a really useful video because it really just boiled it down really simply of like, if someone says they don't want tea 10 times, they don't want tea. And I think though that the way that we're teaching kids about sex, I wasn't taught about consent when I was first taught about sex. This was later. This
Mm-mm.
was in high school. And I think I was
Yeah.
taught about sex in middle school in sex ed as a simply biological function, which it is, but it's also a lot more than that. And so, I don't know, what's your experience with learning about that?
I'm someone who learned completely from the media and the internet. Like, my parents did not talk about it. My Asian parents, like, their only really sexual experience was with one another, like, having had an arranged marriage and all that. And it's just not something that, I think in immigrant families is sometimes not as talked about. I think now it is. But yeah, middle school, I learned a lot about, like, sex itself on the internet. I think, like, some pornographic material showed up on when I was playing, like, fucking Club Penguin or something. Oh my god, I literally remember I was searching up how to, do something on Club Penguin, some pornographic site came up, and I was like, "What is this?" Mind you, my 11-year-old self. And that made me search up, like, what is this stuff? And that is how I learned about sex. And nowhere was consent a part of that at all.
Well, I think that there's something really real to that too, which is that, um, kids, at least in our generation, I think that Google's gotten better about it, but
Mhm.
you could accidentally find porn on the internet very
Yeah,
easily. Like, I remember being with my best friend at, like, 11 and accidentally finding porn, and
yeah.
I think there's an issue about that.
Such an issue. Like, now at least, like, Safe Search, I guess, we think about the internet and media, we think about these songs that talk about everything and this idea of talking dirty, why are things dirty? And at the core of it, I feel like there's so many different ways that this argument can go. And I think something that you and I had brought up ages ago when we were first talking about all this was purity culture.
Talking about dirty and the opposition of that being clean, and that clean is also associated with virginity, purity, culture, the color white, and the times that women are put in the color
Mm.
white in their lives.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like grad dresses, wedding dresses at least. In
And
yeah.
communion, I was raised Catholic. If you're Catholic, white is the sacred color that women wear for everything.
When you think of virginity even, a lot of people see virginity as this sacred purity symbol, right? If someone is still quote unquote a virgin, then they are still pure and untouched and etc. Whereas there's so many things in the media, so many things in history where if you are not a virgin, then you have been damaged. Your goods are damaged. You yourself have been dirtied. And that is the point that I think like purity culture really negates
Right.
sex as a whole.
Absolutely, and I think too I think that there's also a connotation that I've seen conversation about that whiteness being associated with purity and also how that applies to race, and I think that
Mm.
that's a conversation too, not necessarily that we need to have right now, but that what is it about whiteness that we're associating with cleanliness and purity and virginity, and how is that applicable on so many different levels?
Yeah, and I think that's, like, a conversation that's gonna be, so many levels. I feel like every culture, every background has so many different stories on how they were taught about sex and how sex connects to their experiences, and I'd honestly, like, love to invite more people into this kinda conversation or hear more experiences. So if this is you, if you have things you wanna say about how you learned about sex, what it has been in your everyday or cultural experience, like, please reach out to us. Please
I
send
think
us
let's do an
all
Instagram
that.
story poll of,
Yeah,
like or just, like, a question and response. We'll keep everything anonymous of just, like, where did you learn about sex for the first time? How did you learn
because 'cause
about sex
I'm
for the
so
first time?
curious. Yeah, I'm so curious to hear what y'all have to say. But going back to all this, beyond purity culture, I think it's really interesting you bring up the color white because when we think of opposition, the color that defines love and everything, that might be like, this beautiful, like, white color, and then you think about lust and everything is red,
It's
red
literally the angel and devil.
lingerie. Yeah, it's the angel and devil. There's red lingerie, and that's, like, promiscuous. Red light. You see someone with the red lights on, you know
That's how
exactly
they
what they're
put sex
doing.
scenes in shows, going back to media. There's a lot of the red framing of things.
Yeah, and then, like, red lipstick. My gosh,
Red
red
lipstick.
lipstick. Ugh.
About red lipstick, like, by my mom and by other adult women in my life that, your lips turn redder during sex because there's more blood flowing to your lips, and so wearing red lipstick was an indicator that you were having sex and that you were trying to indicate to other people that you were having sex.
Mhm, that's crazy. Cause okay, I feel like my mom's and mine's relationship was very girlhood coded, and so if I wore red lipstick, she's like, "Yes, my confident little daughter, you love color, all this stuff." I mean, Indian culture, we get married in red, like, we don't get married in white. I feel like maybe now with more, fusion weddings, you'll see it, but the traditional color is red, and red is not as promiscuous as I would say it is in some other cultures, and so I loved wearing red lipstick. I remember in high school, right, I was wearing this very normal outfit for a high schooler and wanted to accessorize with red lips because I loved makeup and I loved, like, this idea of, like, BuzzFeed telling me that you should wear red lipstick
Yeah.
and be a confident, powerful woman, whatever, and I was, like, what, 16, 15.
Yeah.
So I'm at this dance, and for the first time ever, I get this guy dancing up on me, and he just kept making these comments of like, "Oh my god, the red lipstick, like I'm obsessed with the red lipstick." And mind you, nothing else that I was wearing was even remotely
Revealing.
revealing. Yeah, and not
Yeah.
that clothes ever indicate anything,
No.
but neither does makeup. You know
No.
what I mean? And it's like a form of self-expression, and that was the first time that I had kind of realized that the intentions of what I was wearing was being received very differently from someone who saw me in that way. And I think that just has so many connotations that we can look at with like this color theory,
Yeah.
right?
This just reminded me of a really interesting thing, which was that my high school, we had a uniform, and so for denim day, they didn't let us dress out a uniform for it, but we wore red lipstick.
Oh.
Yeah,
And why red lipstick?
because it symbolizes sexuality,
Yeah.
and that you're not asking for it with red
Yeah.
lipstick.
That is so powerful.
I think going back to kind of, the way that we look at red as a symbol of lust, lust is an inherent part of relationships. I don't think that two people who are interested in sex can have a good relationship without having chemistry. And we call it
Yeah.
chemistry in a positive light. But it is lust in a way, it is a desire for
Physical
one another.
connection. The physical connection and that desirability of each other. You're so right. And a lot of people look at love and lust so separately, and in some ways the intentionality behind each of them is different, for
Yeah.
sure. But a lot of good, healthy relationships find a balance between the two.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. When you look at relationships and in these things, sex is such a human activity. And I think that, trying to frame it as anything but that, or framing it as something that only one gender can desire, or only,
Mhm.
certain people are allowed to desire or allowed to have, that it takes away from a true part of humanity, which is that, like, sexuality is a good thing. It's
Yeah.
inherent, it's how you reproduce, it's all of that.
It's necessary, yeah. And I think, like, I think you nailed it on the head. A lot of the conversations that are around sex and then in thus part consent related to sex are so rigid. They're black and white. I just took my MCAT recently, right? And had to learn a lot about our boy Freud. Oh gosh.
Congratulations, you're done.
I know, but something that he had coined was the Madonna horror complex. And this isn't Madonna as in like iconic singer Madonna. This is this psychological thing where people usually are unable to see to put affection and sexual desire in the same boat, right? So
Yeah,
like Ma- Madonnas are people who are respected, but they're not desirable. They're saintly. There's this like pure person.
yep,
But a whore is someone that is desirable, but in thus turn not respected as like a potential partner,
yeah.
right? So you can be desirable, but you don't deserve the respect.
I think the modern way that we see that come through a lot is in how we kind of are told, at least I was told, that you can't have sex with someone on a first date if you want to have a second date. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
give it up too soon, that your value is diminished. It's
Yeah.
really at the core of that is the idea that there's separate boxes for people that want sex and people who are making them wait for it. Leave them
Yeah.
wanting more. Every person at some point in their life has probably heard the idea of leaving them wanting more. And I was told that in a very sexual way of like,
Yeah.
you don't give it up early because you want to make them work for it.
So, okay, thinking about consent and all of these different things that, have kind of brought up to each other between psychology and biology and sociology in some ways, like there's so many different nuances to why we see sex as dirty. And I'd like to argue that the reason that people view sex as dirty is not actually tied to the act itself, but to the consent and intentions that go into the
I
act.
think that, one of the reasons why so many people, I think, even themselves can feel dirty after sex is because they feel like a part of their consent was not valued. And that's not to say that, every situation where consent may not be 100% given or the full scope of it may not be there is a situation of sexual assault. I think that there's a lot of the world that exists on a gray scale and a lot of situations where, after the fact, someone may have thought that a sexual encounter was leading to a relationship or was something more valuable, and
Mm-hmm.
the other party didn't see it that way. And
I
they
have
may
something to
feel
say
really
about that.
gross after. Yeah.
There's this one time this guy told me to my face that he could not fuck me and also fall in love with me at the same time.
Yeah.
Like he could not reconcile the two, basically. And at the time, everything up until that point had been quite consensual between us, but we'd also, in my eyes, been building towards a relationship. And I felt so gross.
Yeah.
it wasn't because of the act of anything that had made me feel gross in that moment. It was that I feel like my informed consent had been taken away, essentially.
Yeah.
But there's so many people who also the act itself makes them feel gross as
Yeah.
well.
Well,
It's
and I think a lot of that can be during sex, we all have different boundaries and things that we're comfortable doing and not doing. It could be even that certain, acts within sex, certain positions could make someone feel gross or unvalued or dirty.
and that's where ongoing consent comes in, right? Because there should be check-ins throughout the
Yeah.
sex. There should be conversation before and after sex. It doesn't have to be this long, elaborate process,
Yeah.
right? But most times that people feel like not great after sex is because something didn't go in the way that they were expecting it to.
I think that there's also an aspect to it of the pleasure side of it, which is that
Mm,
if only one person finishes in a sexual encounter, it can make the other person feel like they were used and like they
mm-hmm.
didn't get anything from it, like from a physical
Mm,
standpoint. And that can feel really gross after, of like, oh, I just like my body was used for someone else's pleasure.
exactly. This again connects back to these connotations of dirty. Like someone's dirty, they've been used, they've been ran through, and it like doesn't feel good, of course, to have those inherent like emotions that are tied to those. It also doesn't feel good to hear this label that other folks put on you because of X, Y, and Z. And I think like as a whole, we can start moving away from the word dirty and talking about sex, clean and dirty, because it's such a spectrum. It's not so black and white.
It's grayscale.
It is. It really is. And in these conversations, like if we keep things so black and white, all it's going to do is continue the stigmas that connect to consent and asking for consent and asking questions about what partners want and what feels good. There's so many, like half of the nerves surrounded by that is due to the stigma.
Yeah. And I think that openly being able to discuss your preferences, your experiences, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, is so paramount to positive sexual relationships and positive sexual
Mm-hmm.
encounters. And I think that it's something that so many people struggle with. I mean, I know I myself have struggled a lot with it. And I have moments, even when I'm talking to you and Alex, where I'll get like uncomfortable saying the word like orgasm. Like, there's like moments where I'm like, ooh, like that feels too cliche. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's literally just the word. And it's something that I'm actively working on, and I've been doing this work for years. And I think
Yeah.
that that's kind of the whole point, though. We all come from a different starting point on it, whether that's
Yeah.
from how we were taught about it, our religion, our cultural
Everyone's
influences.
experiences,
Yeah.
everyone's experiences truly are
And
so
so,
different.
working from where you're at and starting with, I know XYZ, I think a lot of it is internal and looking
Yeah.
internally and being able to self reflect on, like, what do I actually enjoy? What makes me feel good? What do I need in order to feel good about a sexual encounter, about a relationship? And then going from there.
And I think it goes beyond that, right? Because once you've done that internal reflection, you also have to respect other people
Yeah.
in where they may be along that. Some people haven't done the reflection yet.
Yeah.
And you can kind of just pose the question of like, do you want to take a second to think about what you're cool with? And just
Yeah.
very casual, very normal. Some people may know exactly what works for them, and it may not align with exactly what you would like. So that's where the conversation comes in, and you find this middle ground of what you both are comfortable with.
Exactly. I completely agree.
And I think, Jason Derulo, Talk Dirty, no hate king. Like, I'm not mad at you. It was a fun
No.
song for the time being. There's saxophones, like all that. But the nuances of talking dirty in the middle of sex is not a bad thing whatsoever. Sexting or
No.
communication, like,
No.
that's not at
That's
all
not
a
what we're
bad
talking
thing.
about.
It's more the nuance of dirty connected to sex and how we talk about sex and how we talk about people as sexual objects and not humans that are making decisions for themselves
Yep.
is the bigger picture here. And I honestly would love to continue this conversation. I think
Agreed.
words are so powerful.
Yep.
and we kind of need to choose them carefully to give people the power and respect that they do deserve.
Yeah, I think that words reflect our attitude as a whole and are reflective of where we stand in a society. I think how we talk about things is not just about the talking, it's about the viewpoint, the culture, the identity. We can all improve our words, myself included.
No, yeah, I think you and I have so much work to that we both ourselves want to do, and
Yeah.
with that, we still are comfortable to continue this podcast. In no
Yeah.
way, I think like within all the learning, there's growth to be had, and I think all of us can continue to grow and adapt.
Yeah. I mean, we're both 23. We know what we know.
Speak
You're
for
22.
yourself.
You're 22. I forgot. I'm sorry.
Speak for yourself. Who's
Right.
we?
I always forget that you're a baby.
Mm.
Anyway, but no, we're young, we're still learning, we're just figuring out who we are as adults, and so I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the whole idea, and that's why we're here. We want to, hopefully our conversations about where we're at and what we're learning and where we're seeing the world and through our unique lens and perspective can help you to also figure out where how you see the world.
With all that, the word dirty holds a lot of stigmas, and it's something that I personally want to move away from using, and how I talk about sex or reference sex, and call out folks who utilize those synonyms associated with it of like, oh, they're ran through, they're like impure, right?
They've been used up.
Yeah, washed up. Ugh. But there's no perfect world, and that's okay. We'll keep working at it.
Thank you guys so much for listening today, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Conversations on Consent.
Yes, we're looking forward to it.